PR's Top Pros Talk, the human side of storytelling, featuring Stacey Kumagai, communications specialist at Media Monster Communications Incorporated. And here's your host, Doug Simon.
If you can pick one lesson you learned from being a journalist that helped in your transition, what would it be?
The foundation. As a journalist, I want to know the who, what, where, when, why, and more importantly, how. I want to know more about the client and whatever the subject is. And so I will ask the probing questions that normally clients don't volunteer themselves sometimes. They have their little canned promo speech and they think that's it to make a soundbite. But, I'm interested in the person behind the story. And that's where you get the real interesting human element of the story at every part of it.
Yeah, and it's also important that you have a background in neuroscience, and that's been a whole growing field in communications about how people make decisions, why they make decisions, and informs communication. What are some sort of top-level tips for people, communicators, to be thinking about from that neuroscience perspective?
Well, really be thoughtful. Be mindful, and more importantly, be present. So often in an interview, a lot of clients that we try to coach, they're so much into their forecasting and projections and looking at something futuristic. Tell us where you are right now. Tell us and be present in your answer and where you are right now. That you kind of then show up more with deeper engagement. It's more of a connective type of interview, and that adds more meaning to your story as opposed to just sounding like a talking head sound piece for your company or your brand.
You also talk, and we've discussed the importance of really getting to understand your client, not just their business, but as you've mentioned, their personality, what's about them, what makes them tick. How do you go about doing that?
Oh, well, I get real at the very beginning. I tell everybody to take their shields down, be open, and really, really share with me your failures, because they're not really failures. We learn from them, right? That's how you end up being more successful. So I want to know where the stumbling blocks were, because that builds character. That's important in storytelling. And I think we miss that today. And so as a PR professional, I really like to find out from my client, what are your failures? What does your past look like? So we can actually be solution oriented in working toward, real answers and crafting the narrative to where we can really connect more on a human level, that other people can engage with the story better because they've been there too. They understand that piece of it. And that connects all of us. And some of these stories go beyond the scope of whatever the PR campaign is. It's more really about the connection and how you can reach a broader audience with just being human, because we're all human on this planet and we all can learn from each other. And if the storytelling is informative and educational, it's a win-win benefit, basically.
I can personally relate to that because sort of part of the origin story of my company is I was let go by my previous job because my boss didn't think I was good at new business. That was more than 36 years ago. Keeping the number in the 30s, you talked about working with companies in 33 different industries. We have that, what for us is a blessing, that we work with companies, organizations, nonprofits from all areas across the spectrum. But if you're trying to dive deep and get to know them and understand what they're about, how do you do that when they're so diverse?
Well, you look at the common thread of what everybody has in common. So let's just say you're targeting a business to consumer industry. It doesn't matter what the packaged good is. Consumerism is consumerism, and we're looking at behavior. We're looking at connection. We're looking at brand loyalty. We're looking at all these things. So PR today and over time has evolved into an integrated process where we're actually looking at the paid advertising, and then we're looking at the organic earned, and then we're looking at the marketing experiential and the customer retention and all of these different things. They all have a play into the PR narrative. And in order for it to be a cohesive campaign, you kind of have to work with all of these different areas. So regardless of the industry, the solution is for 33, 60, 90 industries is having the same type of framework, looking at how they get their messages out. And then more importantly, internally within the infrastructure, what's consistent, what's cohesive, what is working for them in that. And the 33 industries for me actually comes really naturally because I grew up as a do-it-yourselfer. My family was poor. They're World War II generation parents. So we didn't have a lot. So At the age of 6, I was learning the beauty industry. My mother taught me how to cut, color, and perm hair at the age of 6. My dad made me go underneath the car with an 11/16 socket wrench to change my oil. I was working with wood. I was and scroll saws and all of that, and swinging a hammer. So I know that whole construction industry. And then there's the other side of the agriculture and the propagation, because my parents came from the farms. So I learned about that, and food and nutrition and farm to table, organic, sustainability. I love learning and jumping in to something that I've kind of already been given the framework for as a child. Really helped me pivot among those 33 different industries.
Yeah, and natural curiosity as well. It must have been a tough moment for you when things switched to metric and you needed a whole new set of tools, because that 11/16 just wasn't cutting it anymore. I remember that as well. You also like to say that every employee is an ambassador. Now, is that about just being an ambassador by doing a great job and handling everything really well for their clients, communicating well internally, being reliable, et cetera? Or does it go beyond that?
It's all of that and more. And when I say more and going beyond that, it really has to do with the fact that, first of all, the infrastructure, communicating, if your internal team is not aware you're doing a PR campaign, but they're the ones answering the phone or answering the email or dealing with the questions, and they go, what are we doing? That kind of just is like graffiti all over your PR campaign, because the internal employees aren't aware of what's going on externally. I also look at ambassadorship as in when they leave work. If they're excited about what you're doing, and we've got a big campaign happening for a product or service, and they're the mouthpiece for it, they are a walking, talking ambassador for whatever's going on. And that also includes today social media. So you can't be having them tarnish your brand or having negative speak on their own social pages today, because that is now crisis communications, which we PR professionals also have to deal with, because that kind of derails certain tactics and strategies that we're doing when we're trying to put, cohesive messaging together and being, transparent and, being fully aware of what's going on inside and out.
Yeah, we've also seen a transition during COVID where your external communications are almost more persuasive as internal communications than your internal communications. And we've seen a lot of reuse of what we're working on with, brand leaders, spokespeople being interviewed on TV, being used internally. So that's another way that can motivate people. As we wrap up this really great discussion, what are some of the things you see in the future as how the communications industry will evolve?
Well, evolution is inevitable, right? Change is inevitable. And I think in the past few years through this pandemic, we've learned that more than ever.
Right.
I know personally, for me, I was working on a live event that got shut down 2 weeks before, and I had worked 7 months on a PR campaign.
Right.
And all of a sudden we were in quarantine, and it was like, all that hard work, right? But nothing goes to waste. So as I look at the future and I look at PR and the nature of it, we're going to have to really continue pivoting. We're going to have to come up with the plan Bs. We're going to have to, when you're doing PR for certain products or services, be both traditional and digital and live and virtual, and kind of cohesively do your own public relations messaging and relating with your customer or client, in a different way. But that's going to continue to be a process. And then global warming ultimately is going to be affecting media, because the more natural disasters we have, sadly, our media reporters and editors are stretched to the max. All of a sudden they were working on this, and now they got to go cover 10 other disasters. And we need to be thoughtful and mindful as PR professionals and in the media teams that we're working with. So we're building these relationships in working on other messaging.
You brought up a great point there that I want to just take a little deeper dive in. You talk about being ready with a plan B, a plan C, if you need it. Is that something that should be thought through at the beginning? Or is that something more that it's a mindset that as feedback starts to come in, you have to have an environment where it's easy to switch direction based on new information, or both?
First of all, it's both. And that goes back to the original question you asked me in the beginning about getting to know your client. If you really get to know your client about their successes and failures, and you really understand where they're coming from and the intention and message and mission of whatever campaign they're trying to put together, it's easier to have the plan B and plan C, because you understand how they've had to change. If they aren't as skilled or have that muscle exercised in their pivoting agility, then I think it's important to have that discussion up front and also be actively listening as you're continuing to go through it and you're watching the world events go on. Things come in unexpectedly, natural disasters with everything, emergencies, pandemics. I mean, we have to kind of be ready for everything.
I think you've helped people who watch this segment be prepared for a lot more when it comes to their communications. Thanks so much for joining us. Great stuff.
Thank you so much for having me.